Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen along with our co-host Anthony Faso. We just wrapped up our interview with Kyle Stanley, podcast host of The Fearless Investor, and he is a real estate investor as well as an Airbnb specialist. Anthony, what were some of your takeaways here?
I tell you one thing that really stood out. There was a couple things. One is he wasn't happy with his financial situation. Mm-hmm. So you know what he did? He took action.
Did something about it.
Yeah, he went to seminars. He went to meetups. He started to learn and started building up his team. And also, as you know, real estate can be a great way to create passive income. And what he shares is that you just need to control the property. You don't have to own it. For example, he shares that in one of his niches are you don't have to buy the house to turn into short-term rental. You just need to control it. And you can do that by leasing it or renting it out. And then you don't need to put 20% down. Yeah. It could be a great way to create passive income without using a lot of capital. Cam, what were some things that stood out for you?
There's a couple takeaways that I had, and the biggest one that I had was really when he started talking about kind of his mentality and when it changed. Is he said that he was doing okay up until a certain point, but what changed for him was when he started having this abundance mentality. He said he's probably making $4,000 a month in passive income, and he felt like he was keeping this secret to himself, right? And it wasn't until he decided to share it with other friends and other investors kind of in his neighborhood or his community that is really when everything took off. And now you look at him, and he's bringing home more than $20,000 a month just simply by changing his attitude. I love that. We talk about that all the time with clients and on our podcast, and so I think you guys will really enjoy this episode. Kyle, man, thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to hear about kind of your experience with the Airbnb market. Before we dive into that, would you mind starting off a little bit about your story, even how you got started in that section?
Yeah, well, hey, Anthony, Cameron, thanks so much for having me on the show. Been excited. Was happy to have you on our show as well on the Fearless Investor. So thank you guys for doing that. But yeah, I mean, long story short, guys, I was a wannabe entrepreneur for about 10 years. And when I say wannabe, it was, just like Cameron, right? When I say wannabe, I mean, I was really trying, but I just had no direction, no path. I was throwing things at the wall, hoping they would stick. And honestly, that's kind of like what happened with real estate. But the whole time I was working on self-development and working on bettering my mind and understanding, my financial future and how to build wealth and all that. And the more and more I got into that, the more I realized that like passive income, like that's really what is going to get you to being able to live a truly free life. And so, growing up and seeing a dad who owned a business that really the business owned him and being very successful with it, that I wanted that success, but I didn't want to, when I had a family one day, miss my kids' ball games, performances, feel like I barely knew my wife because, I'm always working and I didn't want those things that came along with it. And so long story short, started my own business when I was 23. That crashed and failed, and it should have been shut down a lot sooner than I tried to shut it down. But, ego got in the way and I just kept on trying to make it last. Tried an MLM, tried some sales jobs, tried creating a lot of content and just, I tried a lot of stuff. And then real estate came along in the form of just wanting to listen and educate myself with podcasts, with YouTube channels. And I went to a seminar one day in January 2019. I remember the dates very vividly because it was 10 days before my dad passed. And it was one of those things that was just like, wow, like this is a defining moment in my life. I am going to get into, at that point, what I thought was only going to be flipping houses, and got into it, even though I was starting a brand new job the next day. And my dad was, unbeknownst to me, about to pass in 10 days. It was just one of those things that I was so convicted that this is where I was going to go. And so I got my first contract to flip a house under contract about a month and a half later. And then just all the while was just continuing to educate myself. And this Airbnb thing just kept popping up. And I had been doing Airbnb as a house hacking method in just one of my rooms for the last 3 years, but never thought of it as a full house because I never thought like, oh, you can do this without actually owning a house. I thought you had to own the house. And then when I found out you didn't have to, I was like, this light bulb went off. And long story short, that was May 2019. I had one Airbnb at that time. Now today, as we're recording this, it's January 2021. So not even 2 years, we're at 27 units, about to be at 30 units. And life is a lot different in a very good way.
Well, you know what? I think we need to dive in, because I think of what a lot of people are thinking with the Airbnb. I know, do we call it Airbnb or do we call it short-term rental? Because I know there's other services besides Airbnb. What's a proper way to
Yeah, I mean, short-term rentals, Airbnb, yeah. I switch the terms back and forth. No right or wrong.
Okay, so you'd mentioned that you didn't have to own the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that's eye-opening to a lot of people. You want to explain or dive a little deeper on how that works?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, the conventional way is owning a house, right? And you can do a lot of different things with owning a house. You can own it as a short-term rental fully. You can be like me whenever I leave town, which is going to happen in about 2 hours here. I'm putting all my stuff in storage and renting it out for a week while I'm gone. Or you could rent out a room in your house, which is, a lot of great ways to help you pay your mortgage. But if you want to build a business, I'm always looking for, well, what's the lowest risk and what's the highest reward? And there's two different ways that you can do that in Airbnb. Number one is this fancy term we use called rental arbitrage, where you go to a landlord and you say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Landlord, I'm going to be your best tenant, but I'm not going to actually live there. I'm going to sublease it on Airbnb. Here's why you want me as a tenant rather than a regular tenant, especially with like the new moratoriums that are coming out and all of the things that have happened here in 2020 where evictions are tougher and tougher. We become a much better solution for a landlord. And then number two is maybe that landlord, like a lot of my landlords, say, well, hey, instead of you renting it out, what if I just hire you as a manager for the property? I'll pay for all the furnishing and the amenities and everything. And you, Kyle, you go out and you just manage it. And you take a percentage of the fee, which gives me, I'm going to use your word here, an infinite return on my investment
Nice,
because I've got
nice.
no money invested in the property, which is my absolute favorite way to do it.
Now, why would a landlord want to rent it to you versus maybe somebody signing, who's gonna live in it?
Let's talk about it from a landlord's perspective. The things that they hate dealing with. Calls at 11 p.m. at night when they're sleeping because the water heater's out. Late rent, with all the moratoriums that are going on right now and the eviction issues, the opportunity for all the tenants to say, hey, I'm affected by COVID, so I'm just not going to pay rent this year or this month or for the next however long this lasts. All the repairs that have to happen, you have a tenant call and say, hey, the handlebar fell off the towel rack fell off the wall, and you're like, really? I got to send out a repairman. That's going to cost me $100. That just ate into all my cash flow. I'm only making $200 or $300 a month to begin with on this place. That really hurts. I come in and I say, hey, all those issues that you deal with, you're not going to have to deal with that with me because I'm essentially going to manage the property and I'm going to report to you if there's ever any issues and how we're dealing with them and handling them. So I'm going to right away be your best tenant because I'm not going to call you when that, door handle is loose and we got to send a repairman. I'm not going to call you with the water heater issue. I'm going to send you the bill for that because that's your house and that was your water heater. But you're not going to get the call and all that stuff of like the headache of all of it. You're not going to get the 11 p.m. calls at night. You're not going to have late rent. It's in my best interest to pay you not just on time, but before, because I want to be your best tenant and I want you developing this relationship with me for years and years and years. Meanwhile, in the background, I'm paying $1,000 for rent and I'm collecting $3,000 on Airbnb and I've got about $500 of expenses and I'm making $1,500 a month on a place. That's a pretty typical return on an Airbnb if you're in the right market. So I'm a happy camper and so is the landlord. And before you know it, I'm staying in a place for years and years to come.
Okay. I tell you a couple of things. Well, let's talk about as from an investor's point of view, right? So I own this house. Um, what is great about, I mean, there's a lot of great things about real estate, but one, on a long-term rental, you can hire a management company. So to kind of help deal with those phone calls and collect the rent, which helps it make it more passive. Kind of what you're telling, I'm hearing from what you're saying is, well, now if I'm going to do this, I'm going to fix the door handle and I'm going to call the repairman. And it kind of sounds like I might be less passive.
You might be less passive.
Well, yeah. If I have my long-term rental, I change it to short-term. Long-term, it's very passive because I have a management company. But short-term, from what I'm hearing, it's almost like I'm kind of like the management company. Maybe I don't need to collect the rent because it's through a third party, but I have, I've had Airbnbs and where's last Airbnb I had? I know I might have complained about this on the podcast before. There was no napkins or paper towels.
Oh yeah, that's an issue.
Which to me, I thought, man, I'm eating. So, but anyways,
yeah.
But again, I bothered the owner, to have paper towels. So is there a way that we could make this more passive?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can make any business as passive as you want it to be, right? And that's no different with Airbnb. So from technology to having the right teammates, the right employees, you can make this as absolutely passive as you want, especially from a management perspective on a daily basis with 27 units. Me personally, I'm not taking any of the calls for, hey, we've got an issue at this house, or hey, we've got an issue at this house. I have teammates, I have employees that are taking care of those things and reporting back to me and saying, hey, here's something that happened. We're dealing with it. So to me, that's the biggest reason people get into Airbnb, because they're like, oh my gosh, I can make so much money. The biggest reason people get out of Airbnb is because they're like, oh my gosh, I dealt with so many issues. I didn't have any time to do this, because what they do is they don't see that you can actually create systems, create passive technology. Well, not create the technology, but implement the technology. And before you know it, you're like, wow, how do I go and get my next place? Because this is super simple.
So who are some of the people that you're using? Is it someone on site that's managing these VAs? What are you using for your Airbnbs?
To keep it really simple, I have one assistant who, as we continue to grow now, we're bringing on a part-time assistant to be able to help her have a little bit of time off. But in the beginning, she's my main assistant, and she manages all the cleaners. She makes all the phone calls for any sort of repairs that need to be done. Any AC guy or plumber or anything that's going to come in. She's doing the majority of communication with guests, but we also have virtual assistants. We have 2 virtual assistants that will communicate with guests as well. And we have a big cleaning team, and we have a really solid and reliable interior designing team, so that we don't have to go in and furnish these places when we get them.
If you don't mind me asking, out of those 27 and almost 30, how many of them are yours and how many of them are you managing?
I own 7, and the rest of them I'm managing or arbitraging.
Very cool. And then just to back up a second, you said that in 2 years you went from 0 to 27?
Yeah.
What do you attribute kind of that growth to? Are you in one market, 2 markets?
So we're in one market right now. We're about to get 3 more. That's where the 30 comes from, in Arizona.
Okay.
And that's in a completely different business and partnership. But honestly, guys, I attribute all that to an abundance mindset. Because when I first started in Airbnb, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing that I'm going to keep a secret. I had like 4 units, and I was making like close to $6,000 a month with 4 units. Meanwhile, all these big time investors in town are like, yeah, I've been in real estate for 5 years and I got a passive $6,000 with the 50 homes I own. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing that with like 4 homes.
Yeah.
And so I've really, in the beginning, was just like, don't tell anyone, keep this a secret and just keep building this. And then I kept going to these meetups with a really well-known investor in town, and he just kept saying the same thing. It was have an abundance mindset, help as many people as possible, I promise you it'll come around tenfold. And one day I was just like, I got to tell people about this. And I have a podcast. So I started talking about it on the podcast, and it was just wild how many people came out of the woodworks and were just like, hey, I've got a house. Can you manage it? Hey, I'm interested in getting started in Airbnb. Can you teach me? And it's totally true. Like, it just came back probably 100-fold than what I would have ever expected. If I hadn't told anyone about this, I would be at about 8 or 9 units right now and making about 10 grand a month. Whereas right now we're at close to 30 and averaging about $1,000 per property.
That's awesome.
Awesome, man. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I want to make sure we touch on is you mentioned the eviction moratorium. Has that affected your business over the last 9-10 months?
Well, it hasn't affected my short-term rentals business. I have other long-term rentals that we've been having a couple issues with. So, that's another great thing that if I'm going to go arbitrage and talk to a landlord about this, I'm going to tell them like, hey, I'm not going to be that tenant because I'm going to be getting paid really well so I can pay you your rent. So for me on the short-term side though, no, it hasn't. When COVID hit, we had a short little like dip in occupancy and rates in March and April, but everything has been back to normal ever since.
Which I find interesting.
me too.
During the pandemic, I
Right.
would have thought people traveling less.
So they are traveling less, but when you have so much demand already, it just doesn't really feel much different. So this is market to market too. I mean, if you're in Hawaii, you're probably feeling a big change. If you're in a vacation getaway destination, I got a buddy of mine who lives in Newport and has 30 units there. And he said that, his summer is going to be huge like usual. They've already got a ton of bookings, but like the slow season has been even slower. But for me, I'm in a location where a lot of people have to come to, they don't necessarily want to come to, which is Fresno, California. So when you look at that, you're like, hey, it's a lot of family travel. It's a lot of people coming for business. And then it's very rarely that vacation, like going to Yosemite or going to, one of the beaches, because we're not really attracting a ton of those people. So I like my market because of the consistency, and I think it's very pandemic proof.
You mentioned Fresno and Arizona. I'm assuming you chose Fresno because you live there.
Yep.
And what tools have you used to kind of analyze your market? And then also you mentioned Arizona. How'd you end up breaking into that one?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say if you're sitting here listening to the podcast and wondering like, oh, well, I don't live in a vacation destination, so I can't start Airbnb, you're more than likely wrong. There are, more cities that work with Airbnb than ones that don't. So I would just really encourage your listeners, do the research. I have a free tool on my website called the Airbnb Profit Calculator that you can get. It's at fearlesskyle.com. But another resource I would suggest would be AirDNA, which I believe I also have a link to that on my website. But if not, just go to AirDNA and it's like the MLS of Airbnb. You can just look up what are certain markets doing, what are certain properties of certain sizes doing in certain zip codes. That would be my recommendation, is go check that out. It is a little bit of a paid membership for the AirDNA site. But anyway, long story short, I kind of fell into Fresno because I moved back from Arizona, where I'd started doing Airbnb as the house hacking method. And when I moved back to Fresno, I was like, no one's going to want to do it here. But I tried it and I was like, oh my gosh, people want to still come here. So try it in your market, see what happens. But looking at other markets, I'm just looking for a number of different things. The main thing is stability. Like, I would much rather have a place that I know, like, even their slow season, they're still going to make really good money. Which is why I've kind of stayed away from the really high vacation areas, like the Newports and the cabins and the mountains and all that kind of stuff. You got the really high season, you got the really low season. And I like Phoenix because it's very similar to Fresno, but it has the added desire for vacation as well. So it's the business stuff, it's the family stuff, but it's also, hey, there's spring training and there is a lot of food festivals. There's live music when there's not a pandemic going on. So to me, and there's a lot of sports travel as well, a lot of tournaments going on, and families are taking their kids into the area. So I like looking at places like that, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to the data. And if the data is strong on AirDNA, then just go for it.
Now, if somebody wanted to get into this, how much capital would you recommend them having?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily capital that they have to have or just the availability of capital.
Well,
I teach,
good point.
Yeah. So I teach my students a lot of how to raise money. And so if you want to just get one unit going, I would say, depending upon the size, anywhere between $6,000 to $12,000. And if you're making, call it $1,000 a month, do the math there. You're making your money back right around month 6. To me, if you're putting in $12,000, you should be making more like $1,500 a month, which means that you'd be making your money back right around month like 8, 9. And so that to me is where you want to be. But I know a lot of your listeners probably own houses as well. So, depending on the market and putting 20% down or getting properties creatively using your infinite banking, you got to do whatever is best for you. But to me, like, arbitrage is the best way to get started, because you can get, rather than getting a, 6 to 8 to 10% return on your money with a long-term rental, you're literally just paying for furnishing, and you're making your money back month 6, month 8 for close to a 175 to 200% return on your money year 1. It's just, it's a crazy, when you look at it that way, the returns are crazy.
Now, so you had the example of a $6,000, but once you spend, if you renew the lease for year 2, or 3, I mean, you're not going to have those expenses, right?
Exactly.
Or maybe not as much.
Yeah, I mean, really, your only expenses that you have in arbitrage are restocking all the things you need: the cleaning supplies, the paper towels, the napkins. And that's like $50 a month. So after you paid off all your furnishing, you literally, once again, are basically getting like an infinite return on your investment.
Now, you'd mentioned your students, and so you are teaching people how to do this. You mind sharing how you do that and what the resources are?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we have an absolutely free Facebook group. By all means, go check it out. All you got to do on Facebook is just search Airbnb Masterminds, and you'll see it's a group that a lot of ideas are being exchanged. A lot of people who are new to Airbnb would love to see you in there. That group is growing very, very rapidly. We've got like close to 800 members now.
Nice.
Now, if you want to get serious about getting into Airbnb and building a business, just like I have, of making this a 6-figure business under a year, you have to have either education or a mentor.
Totally.
I don't think it's possible to do this stuff in the speed that you want to move without having someone there to help you. And so what I designed is a course that teaches you exactly that, along with group coaching. So the course gives you about probably 80% of everything you need to know. And then you're in this group coaching setting that's filling in the extra 20% gap, where you get to ask questions. I do a live Q&A every Tuesday. I'm answering specific questions. I'm talking about specific topics to just continue education. So that course right now is actually on a 20% discount. So you guys will have the link. I'll get it to you, but you can check it out. Do you guys want me to give the link right now, or do you want me to give you your link and you just put it in the show notes?
Let's do both.
Okay. Yeah. It's just fearlesskyle.com. And then right under the Airbnb tab, you'll see it's called the Airbnb Kickstart course.
Perfect. Okay. We will have that in the show notes.
Cool.
I got a question. You mentioned infinite banking. Now you're a fan, right? How do you see yourself? How have you used it, or how do you see yourself using this strategy and implementing it with kind of your Airbnb model? Yeah,
I was kind of telling you guys before we got on the show. I have an infinite banking plan. I haven't utilized it yet. I've had it for about a year, but my goal when I'm going to start using it is when I'm especially going into the Phoenix market, where I'm going to have to do some more arbitrages. Mm-hmm. Taking 10 grand out of that to put it into something that is going to make me $1,000 a month, and then make that account whole again after, say, 10 months. That is exactly how I see it going.
And when you first came across IBC, were there any reservations that you had to kind of overcome to get started?
Let's see. I'm trying to think back to that. I don't know that there were any reservation. The only reservation was all of the people that didn't know about infinite banking and were trying to tell me, the Dave Ramsey stuff. Oh, it's a scam. Oh, use a IUL instead of whole life and all this stuff. And there was a lot of noise. And so from there, I was just like, you know what? I need to follow my motto, which is follow successful people. And all these other people that I know are agents. I don't know how successful they are, but here's these guys right here that are like using this and providing me with information because they can do it because they live such a free life. And that was where I was like, let's follow this advice, not the noise.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, one more time, where can everybody find you, Kyle?
Fearlesskyle.com or on Instagram at fearlesskyle, and also our Facebook group, which is Airbnb Masterminds. Would love to see you all there.
And you have a podcast as well, right?
Yes. Thank you. I almost forgot about that. The Fearless Investor is the podcast. Would love to see you guys subscribe, leave a review. And just we're always talking about Airbnb, but I also have a lot of great real estate investors that get on there and talk about other real estate investing strategies.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate your time, man.
Thank you, guys.
Care.